In a sport where everyone seems to love to complain, we're taking a moment to be positive and look at some of the more undervalued improvements in NASCAR history. I'm not just focusing on great things that happened recently, but the clear progress the sport has made since I became a fan in 1989. These are changes that can be universally agreed upon as positive steps forward, no matter when your own fandom began. I've got 5 core topics, some you may not think about daily, that have fundamentally increased our enjoyment of the sport. This is NASCAR's Unquestionable Progress, 5 positive changes. The current standings and race status that are continuously on screen have been a major improvement to race broadcasts over the years. I'm not talking specifically about the way they look. I know there are people who are very into that and will critique everything, but what information is provided? And as the years have gone by, it's much easier to figure out what's going on in a race if you tune in late or miss a few laps. Back in 1989, these graphics were limited to a top 5, or if you were lucky, a top 10 and the lap count when going to and coming back from a commercial break. Roughly every 100 miles or laps, depending on the race length, you'd get a full field rundown that you'd better not miss. And while the race summaries were pretty helpful, which showed you things like number of lead changes, average speed, lap leaders, and the cars out of the race, you'd only get to see it a couple times per race. In 1994, ESPN introduced a transparent graphic for the number of laps remaining in the race that appeared on screen for most of the race. And late in the 1995 season, they introduced a scoring pylon that would appear on screen for most of the race that included the car numbers and sometimes the intervals of the top 10 cars in addition to the lap counter. That was a major improvement as long as the graphic was on screen. You could come in and see who was running near the front and how much of the race was left almost immediately. Around mid-1996, it looks like TNN was the first broadcaster to run a nearly continuous scroll of the entire field standings throughout the race. This would be another major improvement, although it would take all networks until about 1998 to implement such a graphic, which they did in various forms. In my opinion, this was the biggest leap forward, and adding intervals to the graphic was a game changer when trying to follow along. I had always thought when Fox and NBC took over the broadcast rights for the 2001 season that they really revolutionized these graphics. But seeing what came before it, they really just built on that foundation and gave it their own flair, with Fox adding a scroll for the standings and both adding green and caution flag indicators. Then in 2018, Fox introduced the giant column on the left of the screen, which could show up to 20 drivers at once, and is a system still used today by all the networks. Because I'm fairly simplistic and I grew up in a time with very few on-screen standings and status graphics, I'd be perfectly fine with the information we had around 2000. Just tell me where we are in the race, where each driver's running, and how far they're behind the leader, and I'm good. But overall, it's way more enjoyable to watch a race when you know what's going on with your favorite driver, even if they're not shown on screen. I'm going to preface this one by saying this has nothing to do with which networks are currently broadcasting NASCAR, but the progression of how much coverage we receive. The 1989 season was actually the first to have all races televised flag to flag. Prior to 1989, we'd see multiple races, including the Firecracker 400 at Daytona, only having highlights shown. It's wild to think a Cup Series race at Daytona wouldn't be shown in full. However, even with the flag-to-flag milestone, there were still other improvements to make. Through the mid-1990s, depending on when the NFL draft fell on the calendar, either the Spring North Wilkesboro or Martinsville race would be tape delayed. And when we'd get rain delays, you could never tell what was going to happen. Take the 1991 Spring Atlanta race, for example. After completing around 50 laps on Sunday, the race was postponed until Monday, and ABC, who was broadcasting it, had other daytime commitments the following day, and no other network picked up the race. So it ended up being the most recent Cup Series race that wasn't aired. And the rain-delayed Die Hard 500 at Talladega in 1996, CBS showed it a week later on tape delay. And speaking of more tape delay, The Twin 125 qualifying races for the Daytona 500 were never aired live until the 2001 Daytona Speed Weeks, when Fox took over the broadcasting rights. The network put it on Fox Sportsnet for the Thursday afternoon races. Previously, CBS would air tape-delayed highlights on the Saturday before the 500. These were just the races that we weren't getting live. What about qualifying or practice sessions? Coverage of those were pretty much non-existent for quite a while outside of Daytona 500 qualifying. At a time without the internet, how could you keep up with it before the race began? Well, I'd have to hope the newspaper, yes, a physical newspaper that would arrive a full day later, gave the qualifying results to see who won the pole and where my favorite driver would start. Eventually, some of those sessions, mostly qualifying, would air during the mid to late 1990s. And when Fox and NBC took over in 2001, it improved even further. Once Speed Channel became more NASCAR-centric, which I believe is when Fox acquired them, we'd see even more of those sessions aired, only missing a handful of Cup Series practices in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Although the then Nationwide Series and Truck Series were a bit lacking at times. But now, despite there being less on-track action overall during the weekend, I think we're getting just about every session from all three national series. In addition to the current races, older races are infinitely more accessible now compared to the past. That's pretty much the reason I'm here, because I have another channel that started this all where I post high-definition versions of older races, and YouTube is a great source for having instant access to thousands of races, qualifying, and practice sessions. But another great source is the NASCAR Classic website, which also has well over 1,000 races, many of which are higher quality than anything else out there, especially from the 1980s and 1990s. You pretty much have access to almost anything NASCAR you want to see right at your fingertips. Back in 1989 though? Well, I guess tape trading was about the only way you could find older stuff if you didn't record them all yourself. Sometime in the mid to late 1990s, ESPN2 would air marathons of classic races around the holidays. And the ESPN Classic channel would air some races as well, if you got that channel. Other than that, it was difficult to view anything you may have missed or wanted to see from before you became a fan. Mechanical reliability might seem like kind of a boring topic, but who wants to see their favorite driver fall out of a race early because the car fell apart? Back in the 1980s and 1990s, it was fairly routine to see a large number of cars drop out of the race due to mechanical issues. Take the 1992 Trans-South 500 at Darlington, for example. Of the 39 starters, there were 18 DNFs, none of which were due to crashes. And if we want to take a larger sample size and look closer at DNF numbers through the years, I made some exciting charts. The first chart shows the percentage of all starts during a year that resulted in a mechanical DNF. I included anything that wasn't listed as a crash. I'm sure it's not perfect, but it should give a pretty good representation. In 1989, it was over 21.5%, so roughly 1 in 5 cars dropped out of each race that year due to a mechanical issue. And 2023 and 2024, it was only 1.7% and 2.7% respectively. There was 10 times the chance of someone dropping out of a race for a non-crash 35 years ago compared to now. If you notice the spikes in the chart, there's an explanation. In 2004, there were a number of field fillers that dropped out of every race they ran, which inflated these numbers quite a bit. And from 2009 to about 2013, that was the aftermath of the 2008 economic recession that resulted in many teams closing shop or merging, and then creating the start and park culture, so once again, inflating the numbers. If we look at this chart going back to 1975, giving us a nice round 50 data points, it's even more noticeable. The mechanical DNF rate in 1975 was a massive 43.4%. If we take a look at total laps completed compared to what was possible for all drivers, it looks similar to the mechanical DNF charts. In 1989, drivers only completed 82% of laps, compared to 95.5% in 2024. Again, there were dips in 2004 and 2009 to 2013 because of the drivers who were not intending to complete the race. If we take a look at the chart going back to 1975, again, it's extremely noticeable. The drivers only completed 68.3% of laps in 1975. Because this may not tell the whole story due to those not attempting to complete the entire race, and because your favorite driver probably isn't one of those backmarkers, let's take a look at those same charts, but only using the top 20 point scorers for those years. That'll give you a better idea about these rates for those who had full-time rides, wanted to run the entire races, and probably had some fans who wanted to see them on track. It tells a very similar story, with 1989 at a 14.2% mechanical DNF rate and 2024 at only 1.6%. I'm not sure what happened in the mid-2000s to cause the jumping around, but the increase in 2022 would be the first season of the next-gen car. And if we go back to 1975 again, we're looking at a 31.7% mechanical DNF rate, or almost 1/3 of the top 20 drivers dropping out of each race due to a mechanical issue. Ouch. It's not how often they drop out either, it's when. Let's compare two drivers. My all-time favorite, Rusty Wallace, from the early days of this comparison, and today's fan favorite, Chase Elliott, from the current generation. As I'm researching this, Chase has exactly half the starts Rusty had in his career, 353 compared to Rusty's 706. I just went to Racing Reference for each and sorted all their races by laps completed and then scrolled to the bottom. Let's check out Rusty's list here, with the mechanical failures highlighted. Whoa, there are quite a few races where he was on track for hardly any time at all. There were 11 races he completed fewer than 15 laps due to mechanical failure. I'd be, and I was for some of these, massively disappointed to see my driver out that early. Let's take a look at Chase's now. Okay, he dropped out really early in that Dover race and only made it about a quarter distance at Indianapolis in 2017. But that's about it. And overall, in those 353 starts, Chase has just 5 mechanical DNFs, or 1.4%. In his 706 starts, Rusty had 78 mechanical DNFs, or 11%. Whether tuning into the TV broadcast or going to the race itself, I'd feel much more confident about seeing my favorite driver race all day long today than I would have 30 or more years ago. The safety innovations introduced over the years have made NASCAR exponentially safer for both drivers and crew members. Changes to the cars, the driver compartment, the tracks, race procedure, and pit road rules have given us no on-track deaths in the 3 National Series in the past 24 years, and far fewer injuries. From 1989 to 2001, there were 11 on-track deaths in the 3 National Series, and typically at least one big-name driver suffering injuries each year, most of the time requiring multiple races to recover. For example, 1989, Bill Elliott breaks his wrist and needs a relief driver. 1990, Darrell Waltrip breaks his leg and misses 6 races. 1991, Kyle Petty breaks his leg and misses 11 races. 1992, Davey Allison breaks his collarbone, arm, and wrist and suffers a concussion and needs a relief driver. 1993, Rusty Wallace breaks his wrist but doesn't miss any time. 1994, Ernie Irvan suffers massive head injuries and misses over a year. We could keep going, but I'm just going to stop there for now and move on. Similar to the previous topic, we want to see not only our favorites, but the best drivers out there on the track, and these safety innovations have helped keep our current day drivers coming back week after week, except for a few rare instances. To start with, the safer barriers that have been added to every oval track on the circuit to absorb energy caused by a crashing car and lessen the impact on the driver have been one of, if not the most visible innovation. Through the early to mid-2000s, these were installed on high-risk areas and eventually all around the tracks. In addition, any unique areas of the tracks, such as where a wall juts out from an opening, see Jeff Gordon's 2008 Las Vegas crash, have also been looked at and fixed to reduce the likelihood of injury in those areas. The cars and driver compartments have seen huge changes since the 1980s and 1990s. If you take a look at a driver sitting in his car in the 1990s and compare that to the 2020s, it's drastically different. The seats, the headrests, the helmets, the Hans devices, and seat belts have all been improved or made required for maximum driver safety. The open-face helmets and goggles from the past have been replaced by full-faced helmets, and seat belts have advanced from a 5-point harness system to a 7-point harness. And next to the safer barrier, the other visible and talked about innovation is the Hans device. It's been said that some of the previous deaths and serious head injuries could have been prevented by using the head and neck restraint system that keeps the head in place during a frontal impact instead of it snapping forward, causing serious injury. The car safety has been improved as well, with roof flaps introduced to help keep the cars on the ground when they turn backward at high speed. Over the years, adjustments to these have been made, although we still do get airborne cars. Fuel cell safety has also been increased, as previously we'd see fires in many instances of rear-end impact, but improvements in the fuel cell durability and the fire extinguishing systems have seen fuel fires mostly non-existent. We've also seen roll cage and chassis changes, as well as the addition of energy-absorbing foam to help keep that energy away from the driver during a crash. The biggest pit road improvements have been a speed limit for the cars and more protection for crew members. It was only in 1991 when pit road speed limits were introduced after trying some unique and not very good ideas to improve pit road safety. Check out my 1991 pit road rules video for more information. And it took until after the turn of the century to require over-the-wall crew members to wear helmets after an ugly pit road crash between Ward Burton and Ricky Rudd's crew at Homestead in 2001. With fire-retardant suits also required and fewer crew members allowed over the wall, safety on pit road is as good as it's ever been. One of the rule changes having an impact on safety is the freezing of the field when the caution flag comes out. In 2003, they raced back to the line, which usually wasn't a big deal as there was a gentleman's agreement that they'd take it easy in these situations. But once competition ramped up and everyone was trying to get everything they could all the time, one particular incident at New Hampshire in 2003 caused NASCAR officials to finally recognize the gentleman's agreement was no longer sufficient and started freezing the field when the caution came out. Dale Jarrett had crashed and was sitting motionless on the front stretch when the field came by at nearly full speed. So while I liked the racing back to the line, especially for lap cars to unlap themselves, the new rule was definitely needed. As long as motorsport exists, there will always be some level of danger, and while most of these changes were reactive instead of proactive, the sport is as safe as it's ever been, and that allows us to see as many of our favorite drivers as we can each race. NASCAR trying new things and shaking up the schedule has also been a big positive. The only negative I can think of is it's just harder to remember when tracks came on the schedule, lost a race, or shifted dates, which overall isn't a big deal. Needing to be creative during COVID and adjust the schedule to fit 36 races into 2 fewer months, a lot of new and unique concepts were thrown at us these past few years. The Cup Series went dirt racing in 2021, street racing in 2023, moved the Clash and All-Star races around, and added a variety of road courses to the schedule, including the Charlotte Roval, which was a success when many doubted it. I'm not a fan of dirt racing, and I feel like 6 or more road courses is a bit too many. I'd prefer about 4, but trying new things a few times a year to generate some extra buzz and get some new eyes on the sport is definitely a positive thing. If they try these different things with 2 or 3 races per year, you still got 33 or 34 points races that are largely traditional race weekends. The return to historic tracks like North Wilkesboro, Bowman Gray, and Rockingham, while currently only for the Xfinity and Truck Series, have been steps forward despite referencing the past. Some race distances have also changed over the years for the better. Rockingham and Dover used to be 500 miles, which were pretty brutal, and were shortened to 400 miles in the 1990s. The same with Pocono, which was shortened from 500 to 400 much later. And more recently, Texas and Atlanta were shortened from 500 to 400. The limited number of 500 or more mile races left makes those events feel more special, especially those crown jewel events at Daytona, Charlotte, and Darlington. In addition, making one Martinsville race 400 miles and one 500 miles differentiates the two races and makes them unique in their own way in terms of strategy. While the schedule won't be perfect for everyone, having some new events with the traditional ones can help the sport get some additional promotion, add some energy to those weekends, and hopefully attract both new sponsors and fans. If you made it this far, hopefully this video offered a fresh perspective on the long-term progress of NASCAR. It's easy to focus on what's wrong, but these 5 things show just how far the sport has come in every aspect, from the garage to your TV screen. What did I miss? Let me know your top universally positive change in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and check out the rest of my channel for more classic NASCAR content.